Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and thrilled to tell you the second edition of the Codist is now available on Kindle and paperback. Go to Amazon.com. It's either $2.99 or $5.99. They've been playing with the price, but it's still a great price for an incredible story about Satan weaponizing DNA, taking the Y chromosome marker of the Levitical line and trying to wipe out the high priest, the lineage of the priesthood, so that Jesus does not return. If you haven't read the Codist, it is a must-read. Carries 75-star reviews, which is incredible that there hasn't been a bad review yet. Not challenging you to write a bad review, I'm challenging you to read the book. Also, I'm the author of the new book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. Go to ignitinganation.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click on the book. Give us your email address, and we will give you the first chapter for free. It takes a tree, starting with the ground all the way out to the fruit, and tells us why God is trying to show us so much in the natural, that He's trying to reveal such supernatural truths, that it's just really amazing what God can do, which is the story of the tree of life that comes to us in the Garden of Eden and returns to our visible sight when we stand there at the river of life, there in the new heaven and the new earth when it comes down. It's my pleasure today to be back visiting with, in this time spot, 11 o'clock on the second Monday of every month, is our good friend Derek Gilbert. And today we're going to be talking about the day the earth stands still, unmasking the old gods behind ETs, UFOs, and the official disclosure movement. Derek hosts Skywatch TV, a Christian television program that airs on several national networks, the long-running interview podcast A View from the Bunker, and co-hosts Sci Friday, a weekly television program that analyzes science news with his wife, author, and analyst Sharon K. Gilbert. His professional radio career spans 2 decades, including stops in Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Little Rock. Derek launched PID Radio with Sharon in early 2005, making it one of the first podcasts on the internet. Derek's a Christian, a husband, father, co-author with Josh Peck of The Day the Earth Stands Still, Unmasking the Old Gods Behind UFOs, ETs, and the Official Disclosure Movement, and author of The Great Inception, Satan's Psyops from Eden to Armageddon. He's also authored novels The God Conspiracy and Iron Dragons, and he's a contributing author to the anthologies God's Ghostbusters, Blood on the Altar, I Predict What 12 Global Experts Believe You Will See by 2025, and When Once We Were a Nation. All these credentials, and he's our friend too. Here and a regular featured guest on Revealing the Truth, Derek Gilbert from Skywatch TV. Welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Rabbi Eric. It's my honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be with you. It's great to really partner. This all started with our good friend, Dr. Carl Gallups, who's with us right after. Actually, he'll be sitting in the chair next to me in just about an hour. It's just exciting what God is doing in the prophetic. That's what really is the most moving part about what's going on. You know, the embassy and lots of things, but last night, actually yesterday, I preached at 2 different churches. I preached in the United Methodist Church and I preached in the Church of God last night, and I shared with both the groups that George Barna came out with a report that said that America's churches are in the highest level of biblical illiteracy since the inception of the American church.
Yeah.
I'm stunned by that. That
reasons that Josh and I wrote the book, the Day the Earth Stands Still, because we looked at that, and I've been aware and kind of tracking the Barna Group numbers for a while, because Christian apologetics, the reasons for our faith, the evidence that tells us that we can know what we know,
right.
It has been a long interest of mine. And the Barna Group for a while has been reporting that even though about 3/4 of Americans self-report or describe themselves as Christians, when you start drilling down into what they actually believe, you find out that it's really not that many. The most recent report I saw from 2016 showed that about 17% of American adults, or no, I'm sorry, about 10% of American adults have a biblical worldview, And they define that as people agreeing with a certain set of propositions, about 6 core teachings of basic Christianity. For example, Jesus lived a sinless life. You cannot earn your way into heaven. Jesus was born of a virgin, that Satan is a literal entity and not just a force or a concept or an idea. And all of these should be basic Christian teachings, Christianity 101. And yet, when you start asking Americans about that, only about 10% of us actually hold a biblical worldview. But even among evangelical Christians, or people who call themselves evangelical Christians, born-again Christians, it's only about 17, 19%, somewhere in that range there. So even though we are, in name, a Christian nation, the truth is, most of us really don't believe what God said about himself in the Bible. But then when you set that side by side with recent surveys about what Americans believe about extraterrestrials and unidentified flying objects, you find out that there are more Americans who believe that we're being visited by extraterrestrials than believe in God as he defined himself in the Bible. And that's disturbing, because that means the UFO phenomenon is not a fringe topic anymore. 1 out of 3 Americans believes that we're being visited by ET. That's more than 3 times as many who actually believe in God as he is defined in the Bible.
This latest report from this pilot, Air Force pilot, that said that he was either chasing or being chased by, I think he was chasing. In front of him, he saw something that he could not identify, that met no standard, and all of a sudden the world is ablaze again with this UFO, this extraterrestrial phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yesterday the discussions were announced about launching a Mars probe so that they can then visit Mars, land on Mars, analyze the data, and prepare for a human landing on Mars. I don't really know where to begin with this, so I really want to hand it off to you about this extraterrestrial fascination that even further confirms biblical illiteracy, with not understanding the perspective of, first of all, a sovereign God, one creator of all the heavens and all the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens, plural, and the earth, singular. So we have the earth. By the way, it's not flat.
We've taken some criticism here at Skywatch TV because we have a globe as part of our logo. So,
oh my goodness, how can that possibly be? Because I'm somewhere along the way, and I've traveled the 4 corners of the earth. I've just completely missed me falling off the edge.
Yeah,
I just don't understand it.
The belief in extraterrestrials, and we trace this in the book. Essentially, the elevator pitch for the book, if you will, is that the belief in the UFO phenomenon and the existence of extraterrestrials has become a new religion. It has become a new religion because people are looking for the answers that we Christians have in the Bible to the big questions of life, the questions that have bedeviled, if I can use that word, mankind since creation. Where do we come from? Why are we here? And what happens when we die? Now, we've got all those answers in the Bible, and yet we find, and we found this, Josh and I, along with my wife, Sharon K. Gilbert, when we went down to Roswell last year for the annual UFO festival. It was the 70th anniversary of the famous Roswell crash. We found a lot of seekers there. People, when we talked to them on the streets, looking for answers to those questions. They were curious. They knew that something is missing. There's some information they need that would give their lives meaning, and they didn't know where else to find it. Or if they had tried to find it in a church, they didn't get a satisfactory answer there. Again, I mentioned Christian apologetics. That's one of the reasons that, and Josh is in a similar situation. Both of us grew up fascinated with the concept of life in outer space, science fiction. It makes for, great storytelling.
Right.
And it has some wonderful potential for offering answers to these big questions. But when you get into Christian apologetics and you see the evidence for the truth claims of Christianity, it's like, okay, well, now I can know that I know. I don't have to just accept the claims of the Bible just because I've been told by a pastor or my parents or somebody else. You just have to have faith. Well, I've got to have faith in something. I'm one of those guys. My wife, she knew from a very early age this whole thing was real. She accepted Jesus Christ as a little child.
Right.
I accepted Jesus as a boy, backslid for many years, and it wasn't until I started studying the evidence that I came to a conclusion. And what we're saying is, Christians, we don't need to be afraid to address the topic of unidentified flying objects. We are not saying that there's nothing happening out there. We are not saying people aren't seeing mysterious lights in the sky, that those Navy pilots, the F-18 pilots, that police officers and airline pilots, trained observers, we're not saying that they were all hallucinating or making things up. They are seeing something. But we're saying let's apply the same critical thinking to the UFO phenomenon that scientists and ufologists accuse us of not applying to our faith in Jesus Christ. I mean, look, Jesus said we are called to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, and minds. And we believe in that wholeheartedly here at Skywatch TV. So let's ask some critical questions here. Now, I've seen those videos that have been sent out, released by a group, and you're probably referring to the ones released by a company called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences.
That's correct.
Yeah. The gentleman who is their chief of security was a former Defense Intelligence Agency official who was tasked back in 2012 by the Department of Defense with investigating these claims of unidentified flying objects. His name is Elizondo, Luis Elizondo. He left his position within the Defense Department last September, October, and then by December he was feeding this information to the New York Times for a feature story that broke. We couldn't have planned the marketing any better. 2 weeks after this book came out, that video was released of the F-18 pilots in what's now being called the USS Nimitz UFO incident from back in, I think, 2004, about 100 miles west of San Diego. There's been another video, the one that you just referred to, also caught on forward-looking infrared radar by an FA-18 pilot, Navy FA-18 pilot, this time over the Atlantic Ocean, seeing something moving at incredible rates of speed. The Nimitz incident, which I wrote about in the February issue of Skywatch TV magazine, is really puzzling because this thing that they saw and captured on infrared radar showed no infrared track. In other words, it wasn't burning fuel in order to move, and yet it was moving half again faster than the F-18s. In fact, it was moving faster at an estimated rate of about 3,600 miles per hour, which is faster than the SR-71 Blackbird, which is the fastest known human aircraft. But that doesn't mean it's not terrestrial in origin. Just because this is a technology that we, the public, aren't familiar with, does not automatically mean that it's come from outside the solar system. We need to start right there. The history of the 20th century is full of secret military projects that stunned observers when they were finally revealed. Stealth aircraft, for one. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that this thing came from outer space. The other thing to know about the To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences is that the board of directors is filled with men and women who made a career working for the intelligence services or the Defense Department or both. So we can just ask a few critical questions here. Is it possible? And by the way, this group, this To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, is headed up by the former lead singer of a very popular band from the 90s and early 2000s called Blink-182, a gentleman named Tom DeLonge, who is a true believer in the existence of extraterrestrials. So you've got a number of guys who formerly worked for either inside or as contractors for the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, which is their the place where they develop new and secret programs for the government, coming together in this new for-profit venture to create educational programs and entertainment programs promoting the idea that extraterrestrials live and they've had some impact on human history. So it's possible that these gentlemen, and well, men and women who've made a career in the intelligence services and working for the Defense Department, have decided to go into the private sector and use their experience in a new venture. Hey, okay, good for them. They just happened to choose the former lead singer of a rock and roll band as their CEO. Now, why would that be? Okay, maybe he's the best man for the job. There are people who might look at my history and say, well, he's just an old top 40 disc jockey. What does he know about biblical theology? Okay, we'll set that aside. There are a couple of possibilities here, other possibilities to consider. Is it possible that these are all true believers in the existence of extraterrestrials who are just trying to propagate that meme, spread the idea among the public, as if Hollywood wasn't doing that already, that these things are real, and that we as humans need to come to terms with our new role in the cosmos as just one small planet in the galactic federation of planets, or the Great White Brotherhood, or whatever they want to call it? Or is it possible that this is the intelligence community doing what the intelligence community has done forever, and especially, as we document in the book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, since the very beginning of the UFO phenomenon in 1947, there has always been a very heavy footprint left by the intelligence community. With every major event, the intelligence community was there shaping the narrative. So is it possible that this is, this To the Stars Academy, responsible for the release in December, responsible for the release of this new video here in early March? Is it possible that they are either A, just marketing, trying to gather investors for their venture, or B, this is the intelligence community doing what they do best, shaping the narrative and shaping what we believe about extraterrestrials and the existence and their existence? That's my belief. I think this is the intelligence community using a well-known personality, in some sectors anyway, Tom DeLonge, to help them get the message out there and shape the narrative. There have been a number of reports here recently of Russian and Chinese hypersonic craft, hypersonic missiles that have been developed. It's possible that the United States, well, I'm sure the United States is likewise developing hypersonic craft. It's possible that these F-18 pilots stumbled onto something that they weren't supposed to know, and that this information is now being released in this way by guys who've spent their entire professional career to this point in the intelligence community to try to shape the narrative, so that the Russians and the Chinese don't know that we have a craft that can move at 3,600 miles per hour.
Derek, let me add some personal credence to exactly what you're saying. In the mid-'80s, I was relocated from AT&T from Atlanta to California. And during that time, I became a partner in a defense contracting firm that was charged with taking things like the Tomahawk missile, the Sidewinder missile, and miniaturizing them so that in the war room at the Pentagon, that they could have miniaturized actual working models, but miniaturization, 1/100th of the size, because you can't bring a Tomahawk cruise missile into the Pentagon, okay? But, a miniaturization. Well, a project came in for us to build something that was smaller than my fist, that was called a guide horn, and it was 4 pieces of copper in a particular pyramidal shape that had slots cut into it, and it was to be mounted on the bottom of a satellite for microwave absorption. Okay, now we're all familiar with radar, but radar is old technology. Okay, new technology is microwave, sending a microwave signal out and getting a much better picture of what it is that we're looking at. This was a design that was to bolt on to it. It was, like I said, no bigger than my fist, that would take and channel the microwave signal into, and it would so confound by bouncing it around into these minutiae spaces that it would only absorb, it would not reflect, and therefore anything it was attached to was invisible, completely invisible. So if you were to take a satellite, all right, and you would use a microwave signal to look for that satellite, you would not be able to see it, even though it was there. But if you were another craft that wasn't using microwave, you might see some of the lighting or some of the LEDs or some of the internal workings of it, just based on reflection of the sun off the hull of these satellites. And so I know this was, I adopted my daughter in 1989, so this project was 1987 that we began working on this guide horn that was to absorb microwave energy. So that's now 30 years ago. My daughter's 28. That's now 30 years ago. That technology has advanced to the point where we can now take things bigger than most buildings and make them invisible. They are stealth. Mm-hmm. They give no carbon footprint whatsoever to modern technologies, investigative devices. They have cloaking devices. These, there's always the science fiction that's wrapped around the idea of real live technology. So cloaking devices of the Star Wars generation, of making myself invisible, is that completely science fiction? And the answer is no. We've had the intelligence communities working on this. This is the subject of my book, The Codist, the weaponization of DNA. There's 50% of the genealogical world geneticists that believe that SARS, HIV, Ebola, sickle cell anemia are all lab-created, weaponized DNA to take out a race of people. Okay? And were released into the system, into the environment, either through the air or through water. And that this technology was so prevalent that a number of world nations gathered together to have a non-proliferation agreement for the weaponization of DNA. Now, we always talk about nuclear non-proliferation agreements. We never talk about DNA weaponization, and knowing that there are certain markers that certain races have that distinguish them genetically from another race of people, Jews being particular, only the Levitical line we can identify right now. But imagine using that as a weapon. People would say, well, that's something that's supernatural or doesn't even exist or is inconceivable. That's so far-fetched. That's why it's in the world of fiction. But these are real, live circumstances we're talking about, and real, live people, real, live intelligence communities that we don't know about and we're not supposed to know about. But we serve one Creator that has imparted to us incredible gifts of the ability to recreate or to reassemble the elements that He's given us, and He's given us all these elements. In this case, it was beryllium copper that was the most microwave absorbative material that was used. We're going to talk more about this. We've got to take a break, but we're talking with Derek Gilbert of Skywatch TV and co-author of The Day the Earth Stands Still, Unmasking the Old Gods Behind ETs, UFOs, and the Official Disclosure Movement. We're going to dig more into this and tie more and wrap more of this into the biblical, talk about a little bit about Genesis 6, talk about the offspring and the outcropping of a race of people that are not of man, but are of the fallen one, and examine that and see whether or not there are technologies that can be assigned to this particular group of individuals that, in my belief, the flood wiped out all mankind, and they did not qualify because they were not mankind. We're getting into the Bible now and tying all this together with Derek Gilbert, co-author of The Day the Earth Stands Still. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll rejoin our conversation with Derek Gilbert. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth true to our calling to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Derek Gilbert, co-author of the book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, Unmasking the Old Gods Behind ETs, UFOs, and the Official Disclosure Movement. Derek, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You know, when we went to break, we clearly established that more people believe in ET than the God of the Bible. We all wish that was a joke. However, in your book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, you kind of blow the lid off of this idea that extraterrestrials are a non-God engagement, that God's left out of the equation, and brings into the fact that the sovereignty of God is in my opinion, there's no contest. God is sovereign. It means
right.
All things, whether or not we understand, grasp, and can explain, all things are sovereign under the authority of the one true God. So now we come into this environment where we're looking at UFOs and extraterrestrials. We're finding the unearthing of odd-shaped looking critters and men with elongated heads, and we automatically go to the same image that has been used over and over and over and over and over again to represent a different form of man. But when we look in the Bible, we see that there were offspring from the fallen angels that were not man, and they weren't God, and they weren't angels. Angels can't create after their own kind. So what did they actually look like? We aren't given a description. These were the Gilborim, the mighty men of renown. I think of the mighty men of renown as being Thor and Hercules and these giants, even Goliath himself at 9 feet 8 inches tall, or 9 feet 9 inches tall, as being a descendant of this lineage, of this bloodline of the fallen ones. And so, you know, if you're going to take, we were created in the image of God. The angels were not created in the image of God.
And I think that's an important point to bring up, and that's something that we dealt with in the book, because I'll say again that Josh and I don't believe that nothing is happening. Something is going on.
Right.
It's just not what the UFO true believers think it is. Now, for the record, we do not believe there's any credible evidence that genuine extraterrestrials have been visiting Earth. That's not to say we've not been visited. The Earth has been visited by inhumans, which by definition the angels would be.
Yes.
For thousands of years. And it's interesting that researchers, serious secular researchers like Jacques Vallée, J. Allen Hynek, who invented the close encounters scale, close encounters of the first, second, third, fourth kind, John Keel, the writer of the author of the Mothman Prophecies, came to believe that the evidence better fit an extra-dimensional hypothesis rather than an extraterrestrial or interdimensional hypothesis. In other words, the reason that some of these craft seem to violate the known laws of physics is because they're moving in and out of our three-dimensional space, which makes, and Josh likes to use the explanation of the old book from the 19th century, the Flatland, to explain how a two-dimensional creature, something that only lives on a plane, might perceive something like a human hand moving through its plane of existence. It would see a number of circles, and then suddenly all of them would join together as the hand moved through that particular plane, and then it would reverse the process as it moved back out. I mean, that's a very simple explanation, but that is one way to think about what we may be seeing as opposed to something coming from another star system. Because, in fact, the excellent recent film Alien Intrusion, produced by Gary Bates, based on his book of the same name, shows the science for moving from one solar system to another is really a lot more difficult than science fiction authors give it credit for. I mean, the impact of hitting something the mass of a raisin at the speed that you would need to travel between the stars so that it doesn't take forever would be, many times the power of a nuclear weapon. So there are many reasons why traveling between the stars is a lot less conceivable than we'd like to think it is. But the Bible tells us, I mean, if the secular UFO researchers are willing to consider the possibility of extra-dimensional entities, well, now they're talking our language. This is our Mars Hill moment to say, hey, these unknown entities, we know who those are. Let's talk about that. But here's the key. The fear, I think, among many Christians is that if we were somehow, someday, to confront an actual extraterrestrial, if someday Klaatu lands on the White House lawn, or Gort, Gort's the robot, I guess, and says, take me to your leader, or Klaatu Barada Nikto, or whatever, that would somehow invalidate the Bible. And that's not true if we properly understand what it means to be created in God's image. Now, Rabbi, I know you know this. The Hebrew is more nuanced than English.
Yes.
We think image means physical appearance, that God is somehow a biped standing about 6 feet tall. Well, no, that's not what that means. Being created in God's image means we bear his image. We carry his image. We are his moral agents on earth. That is our role. And that is the status that applies to all humans, all human life, regardless of our education level, regardless of our gifts, abilities, our incapacities, people who are newborns, infants, level of development. It doesn't matter. If you are human, you are created in God's image. If you suffered severe head trauma, if you're a soldier who's been wounded and lost a limb perhaps, if you're debilitated because of disease, it doesn't matter. You are still created in God's image. You are God's image bearer on this earth. And the sudden and unexpected arrival, because again, personally, we don't think this will ever happen, but if an actual extraterrestrial from Zeta Reticuli shows up on the White House lawn, that does not change your status as an image bearer of the one true God. It has no bearing whatsoever on your Christian faith, and so we can put that to rest. The theological fear that we've had, that somehow the existence of ET invalidates the Bible, based on a complete misunderstanding of what it means to be created in God's image. And that's another main reason we wanted to write the book, to get that out there. We don't have to be afraid of the UFO phenomenon.
Man doesn't even understand the concept of heavens. First heaven, second heaven, third heaven, atmospheric heaven, outer space, and the throne of God. The ascending and descending. These are images given to us in the Bible, but because people don't read the Bible, and especially the Old Testament, that's just passé.
Read it, and this is a problem with the UFO phenomenon. We will read our 21st century ideas and worldview back into the Bible. For example, Ezekiel chapter 1, where he sees a throne room vision of God, and the wheel within the wheel. We 21st century types say, oh, well, that sounds like a disc. And it's flying. That must be a UFO. God must have been an alien. And that's part of the support that the ancient aliens hypothesists, the preachers of this ancient astronaut gospel, have been using to support their ideas, which come right out of the occult. And I'll get to that in just a bit. But the imagery that Ezekiel saw, writing in about the year 590 BC, was actually imagery that anyone in his time and place would have understood. This was a description of a royal throne. Thrones back in the day were guarded by entities that, were cherubim. The Akkadians called them Lamassu. But you would see them in Canaan, you saw them in Babylon, you saw them in Egypt. The thrones looked the same. Many of them had wheels on the feet that looked like the feet of the cherubim. that Ezekiel described. It was common imagery. They understood what they were seeing then. It's not that they were too primitive to understand that they were seeing a UFO. It's that we think we're so advanced that we don't understand what we're seeing when we read Ezekiel chapter 1 and Ezekiel chapter 10. Common imagery, and we've got other images that have been found from the ancient Near East that prove that what Ezekiel saw would have been clearly understood by his readers back in the day. Now, the reason we gave this book the subtitle, Unmasking the Old Gods Behind ETs, UFOs, and the Official Disclosure Movement, is because the modern ancient astronaut hypothesis, this idea that the gods of ancient Sumer, the Anunnaki, were astronauts who came to Earth and created mankind as a slave race, grew out of the 19th century occult teachings of Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy. Later, Aleister Crowley, who channeled, and I believe he was hearing from something, not the Egyptian gods that he thought, but he was hearing from something, who created their own religions. Blavatsky in particular created this her religion based on the idea that mankind was going through a series of upgrades, if you will, that our root races were, I think we were on the fourth root race or something like that. I'm certainly not an expert on Blavatsky. I learned enough to see that her fiction, because it truly was cribbed from old Sanskrit teachings and stuff that she was fed by whatever entity she was hearing from, which, by the way, she believed these masters of ascended wisdom that she was hearing from were located somewhere near the star system Sirius, or at least that was what her later followers believed. It involved lost continents, the lost continent of Atlantis, the lost continent of Lemuria, and the horror fiction author of the 1920s and 30s, H.P. Lovecraft, who was an atheist, or claimed to be, but was more than happy to use the teaching of the Theosophists as grist for his fictional mill. He wrote lots and lots of short stories, most famously the Cthulhu mythos, which is a series of stories kind of loosely tied together about these old gods who were actually travelers from other stars, who, when the stars aligned correctly, would return and reclaim the earth as their own, and woe unto mankind when that happened. In the meanwhile, they were dead but dreaming, lying, sleeping at the bottom of the ocean in the midst of a ruined city, or in another story called At the Mountains of Madness, in a lost civilization underneath the mountains of Antarctica. The inspiration for the John Carpenter movie, The Thing, by the way, or the story that inspired The Thing. Anyway, Lovecraft wrote a bunch of this and inspired a number of friends to write in his sort of milieu, using characters that he created and other fictional ideas. In the book, we show that even though Lovecraft believed he was an atheist, there are some parallels in the fiction that he wrote and the holy books created by, or fed to, channeled by Aleister Crowley for his occult religion, Thelema, that are beyond coincidental. And in fact, Crowley's personal secretary, Kenneth Grant, who then developed Crowley's magical system into what he called the Typhonian Order, a religion that essentially worships the god of chaos, Typhon, or Set in the Egyptian religion, believed that Crowley, who was writing in about 1907, and Lovecraft, who wrote The Call of Cthulhu in 1926, were hearing from the same supernatural, the same spiritual entity. In other words, they were channeling the same old god. And that is where Lovecraft got the inspiration for the fiction that he created as a man of science. And that's how Lovecraft saw himself. Well, Lovecraft was never very popular while he was alive. He died in 1936, but his fiction was republished and reprinted throughout the 30s and 40s. A lot of it was sent out in pulp magazines to GIs who were serving in the Pacific, serving in Europe, and their fiction got into the hands of the Europeans. And the French in particular found that they really liked the horror fiction of Lovecraft. It involved a lot of things that we see on the History Channel today. Megalithic architecture, mysterious ancient monuments that we can't build with the technology that we have today. Well, except that we really can. They just don't tell you that. All of this inspired by the teachings, the occult teachings of Blavatsky and Crowley, who came before him. The French ate it up. They loved it. There were a couple of science fiction magazine publishers named Powles and Bergier in the 1950s who basically took Lovecraft's stuff and his fascination with these mysterious ancient monuments created by these old gods from the stars, put it into a book, and published this book in 1960 called Dawn of the Magicians or Morning of the Magicians, something to that effect. It sold pretty well in Europe. It was translated into English about 1963. Mm-hmm. And like anything in the world of entertainment or publishing or music, if you hit on something that's new and successful, people will start to copy it. Well, along come about 1968, a hotel operator in Switzerland took what Powles and Bergier had written based on the inspiration of H.P. Lovecraft, which was really just repackaged occult stuff from Blavatsky and Crowley. And he put out a book that became the best-selling book of archaeology of all time. And this hotel operator was Erich von Däniken. The book was Chariots of the Gods, which has sold something like 60 million copies around the world in the last 50 years. It's a bunch of hoo-ha when you start looking at it, but people ate it up. The creator of The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling, did a television film on it. A feature film that played in theaters was based on Chariots of the Gods. He's written a multitude of follow-up books, and now because of Chariots of the Gods, and then Zecharia Sitchin, whose book, The 12th Planet, was published just a few years later, and he's the one who proposed that the gods of the Sumerians were actually astronauts. Between Sitchin and von Däniken, we've got this whole false religion based around the existence of extraterrestrials who are our true gods, and the History Channel's making a killing on it. They're in their 12th season now of Ancient Aliens.
Yes.
And there is no serious scientific evidence that we have ever been visited by a genuine extraterrestrial. Although, like I said, plenty of eyewitness testimony to the fact that Earth has been visited for thousands of years by inhuman visitors, but they're coming from outside our dimension, extra-dimensional. And when you start down that road, like I said, now you're talking Christian language. We know who those extra-dimensional visitors are. Principalities, powers, rulers of spiritual wickedness in the high places. That's who we're dealing with. And that's where we need to start the conversation with these people who are traveling to UFO festivals. In fact, there's one coming to our neck of the woods here, Eureka Springs, Arkansas, in just a few weeks. 31st annual, the Roswell UFO Festival, McMinnville, Oregon, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. There are festivals, Joshua Tree, California. Thousands of people travel from across the country and from around the world looking for answers in these mysterious lights in the sky. We've got the answer right there in the Bible.
And the simplest understanding is that until the events of the book of Revelation happen and Satan's access to heaven, to the throne of God, is cut off, and the third of the angels that fell with him, we don't know whether or not they have the same access as he does, but we do know that a portion of them were bound and will be released for a period of time to torment men. But there are still part of that 1/3 that have a follower, a leader, whether or not you call him Lucifer, Hasatan, Satan, whatever, who has the ability to travel from the earth through the atmospheric heaven, in through outer space, into the throne of God, as he did with Job, and presented his case, his argument on your behalf, or against you, against me. That does not get taken away from him, his access to heaven, until Michael finally has the final encounter where heaven is finally cleansed and he no longer has access. Well, this ascending and descending, we've read about. It says that no one, meaning person, has ascended and descended except the Son of Man. Okay? Makes it very clear that it's not a man, but yet it is an entity. And this entity that has access to ascend and descend from heaven, meaning the third heaven, the throne of God heaven, the dimension in which God operates in, and all these are parallel universes, parallel dimensions, all simultaneously occurring. All this because God is the God of time and God is the God of dimension. So when we understand that, then the Word of God clearly explains that yes, there is no man, that this is this group that has descended from heaven, that still has access to heaven, and therefore this transportation, we have no explanation for what mode or method of transportation. But Paul makes such an interesting comment. He said, be kind to everyone, for you might be entertaining an angel. Okay?
Right.
He doesn't say you might be entertaining a fallen angel, or that you're entertaining your guardian angel, or your Gabriel, or your Michael experience. He's just saying in the angelic realm, all right, that this access to heaven and this access to earth still exists today, and therefore not should you just be kind and love your neighbors yourself because these are the teaching of Jesus, but let me make this even more for you super fantastical, supernatural, super sensational people. Be kind to everyone because you just might be entertaining an angel. Well, that sums it up, that there is time travel, there is supernatural travel between the dimensions of God, of all God's creation, and part of that God's creation is the angels, not created in His image. They had their own image, their own purpose, and the ones that fell took on human form, but the ones that did not fall, when they visit here, we read only an account of them being young men. They only fall into a category, they're young men. No, they're not little fat babies with wings, and no, they're not Hallmark, but they're all encounters with them throughout the Bible came in the form of young men. So it's not old men, it's young men, and we notice about them certain unique features of their strength, their virility, their not identifiable, but they're not unidentifiable. It's just they fall in that category of young men. Derek, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We can talk about this for days because it's such a fascinating subject. But we're going to pick this conversation up again next month when we have you back on the second Monday of the month. And the second Monday of the month will be 11 a.m. on April the 9th will be the next time you and I will visit with each other. In your regular slot, we call it the Derek Gilbert Hour, but it's really all things that man wants to make sensational that God's already explained. So we are able to explain what the world calls unexplainable right here on Revealing the Truth. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless all of you at Skywatch TV.
Thank you. My honor.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.